Welcome to Season 2 of the Pivot Point podcast. This season, we are featuring candid conversations. We're interviewing industry experts and leaders about candid conversations they've had that involve gender in some way. They're going to fill us in on what happened, what prevented them from addressing it, the risks they took in that conversation, why they chose to say something, and how they handled it, and what happened next. Stay tuned for Pivotal Stories, a Positive Change. In the studio, we have it today, Eric Brotman, CFP, AEP, CPWA, and President and Managing Principal of Brotman Financial Group, an independent firm assisting clients with wealth creation, preservation, and distribution. Mr. Brotman began his financial planning practice in Baltimore in 1994 and founded Brotman Financial Group in 2003. He provides investment, retirement, estate, insurance, and comprehensive financial planning services for families, professionals, executives, and business owners. His clients enjoy extraordinary client service from working with multiple CFP practitioners and a team of specialists. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Julie. Glad to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Sheryl Brown, who introduced us, is going to be on the other side of this episode as we're recording. So I'm excited to compare and contrast perspectives in the finance industry, which has not always been the most gender inclusive. So I'm excited to hear from you, your perspective, what's worked well in your own business. But before we get to all that, I understand you have a candid conversation you'd like to share with our listeners.
I do, and that candid conversation, frankly, happened almost 20 years ago when I was invited to attend a meeting of the Executive Women's Network of Baltimore, which struck me as peculiar at the time. This was the mid-'90s, and I didn't expect that to happen. I was early in my career, and I didn't even think I could attend such a meeting. But not only did I attend, I realized I knew dozens of people there. I was invited to join, became a corporate sponsor, ultimately was asked to serve on their board of directors, and for a time was the only male member of an organization with 400 plus women here locally, which created lots of candid conversations, let me tell you.
So how did that feel to be one of the only men or the only men in rooms with hundreds of other women?
Well, from a general membership standpoint, I would say I expected to be a bit of a stranger in a strange land, but I actually found the group incredibly welcoming on the whole. I found it very communicative. I found it very welcoming. I found that folks were, I think, curious as to how I wound up there. And really, I was doing business with so many women who were entrepreneurs and business owners, and a forgotten segment, arguably, of the population, which is terrifically successful for financial advisors who are able to do that kind of work, that I was really embraced. Now, I will say, when I was asked to serve on the board of directors, there were other directors who clearly did not want me there. And so that was an interesting thing. I tell folks it's kind of like I imagine the first female board member at IBM in the 70s probably experienced, except without the cigar smoke or anything inappropriate happening.
Well,
so there's that.
I mean, that's brave of kind of to step into that and realize that you're different, but wow, they've reached out a hand and engaged you. So, I'm a big believer in Pivot Point. Our business or podcast is all about including men as allies in the conversation. So it sounds like you were an early ally, Eric. How have you seen things change? So you mentioned 1990s,
Yeah.
Not the most gender diverse, not the most gender equal. I know fast forward to today, you're experiencing a lot of equality in your own business, but walk our listeners through kind of what you've seen over the last couple decades. What's changed?
In the industry, I would say not very much, which is kind of alarming. This industry is still, I anecdotally believe it's about 90% male. And financial advisors, one of my close friends is a financial advisor with a major wirehouse here in Baltimore, and she's the only woman in her office of 50 or 60 advisors. So that is not uncommon, and it doesn't make sense because, quite frankly, I think women have on the whole, the right listening skills and the right aptitudes to be better at this than some of their male counterparts. So in our firm, we actually have 8 financial advisors, 4 are men and 4 are women. That wasn't done on purpose. We selected great people when we found them, but it did work out that way, and it does create a nice balance. In addition, our executive team our executive team is a 5-member executive council, 3 women and 2 men. So I think we actually have a incredible diversity here, not only along gender lines, but along age and background and other types of lines as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you said that we didn't go out intentionally to have 50-50 male and female. And actually your executive team, a little bit more female, but it happened because we hired the right people for the right positions with the right skill set. So how do you think you've been able to achieve that, knowing that's pretty atypical in your industry?
I wish that I had that secret recipe, and I think if there's a secret, it's no secret. It's that we actually engage in those interviews and conversations without any type of a preconceived notion about the folks we're going to sit down with. I think if you have this idea, like, for many, many years, girls in school were told you're not good at math and science. Well, of course, we know that's not true today, but for many years, they were told they weren't good at math and science, and therefore they weren't good at math and science. So
Yeah.
I think if you tell a bunch of women you're not cut out for this career, some of them are going to believe it.
Right.
The ones who say, "Oh, yes, I am," and watch me are the ones we really want, because they're the stars waiting to happen.
Yeah. Well, I like how you articulated some of the strengths that women can bring to the table as leaders. There are some gender generalizations that tend to be more true. Like you said, listening skills, buy-in, collaboration are known to be more highly correlated with female leaders. However, I think your vantage point of, hey, we wanted to make sure we were hiring the right skill sets. What I heard you say too is that you're kind of unseeing the differences, what I would call unconscious bias that affects a lot of us, as we don't really overtly say, well, women aren't good at math. We don't say that as much anymore. We might be thinking it like, oh, that's interesting. Like that might not be a career for a woman. We might be thinking or might be surprised when we do see a woman, like the one woman you were mentioning at the wire firm,
Sure.
and by choosing to unsee it is a disciplined art and skill. How have you been able to unsee it? Or what would you offer to our listeners to kind of unsee maybe your own bias that you might be bringing to the table?
Well, the serious answer is years of practice. The tongue-in-cheek answer is just have a daughter. I have an 8-year-old daughter who I think can take on the world and be anything. And of course, I want her to grow up believing that and to know that it's true. And so that has certainly helped me as well. But the serious answer here is that you have to use some trial and error. And we've had great hires who were male and great hires who were female. We've had lousy hires who were male and lousy hires who were female. And to say there's rhyme or reason to that along gender lines would be foolhardy. It's not the case. There are just people who wind up being right for this role and for this firm and for our culture, and others who aren't. And I tend to think that those types of clients or prospective clients who would say overtly or feel overtly that they didn't want to work with a woman advisor are probably 25 years my senior and soon not to be the decision makers in their family tree.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit of an outdated mentality, but I would also venture to say you're probably not attracting those types of clients, right?
No, we certainly aren't. And that's okay. We tell everyone the same way. We say we don't represent cowboys. We're not looking for speculators. We're not looking for folks who want to trade regularly. We're not looking for folks who want to be all about the index and whether they beat it or that. We want to work with folks who are family stewards, who are planning a legacy, who are really making the tough decisions and doing all of the work involved in making sure that what they leave behind is more than money, and that they live with dignity and reach financial independence. And none of that is a spreadsheet or a math problem to begin with. I mean, there's certainly a component to it, but most of it is human. Most of it's qualitative. A lot of it's behavioral.
Yep. Relationships. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Not just relationships and trust, but also the guidance, the mentality that comes from consulting and coaching. And the best consultants and coaches are often women. In fact, coaching is something that is, whether it's life coaching or executive coaching, I suspect they're very female dominated.
Yeah.
And we see this as a complementary role to that, and actually try, while we're not coaches or therapists in any way, shape, or form, we certainly try to bring that type of not only listening and engaging, but relating to our team. And so I think it does happen naturally when you realize what you're looking for isn't necessarily a math wonk.
Right. It's a much broader skill set. Well, and I liked what you said too about appetite for risk. There's been a lot of research and studies done. In fact, one of my favorite case studies was back in Iceland during the financial crisis of 2008. They realized in hindsight they had a really big appetite for risk. And that's what they attributed to kind of their downfall of making some really risky moves that we all know now didn't pan out so well. And so they've actually now mandated that there's more gender equality in that sector because the risk aversion was just so, their appetite for risk, right, they weren't balancing it with some risk aversion, which again, women in general tend to be a little bit more risk averse. Not always, and that's definitely a fluid gender norm. But I think it's interesting to kind of think about your team dynamic, balancing out risk, and you don't want all cowboys, right? You don't want all people that are also not.
Actually, we don't want any cowboys.
No cowboys allowed.
Cowboys not welcome.
And that says a lot about your culture and the cultural values that are important to you, which we also know drives diversity. The other thing about your story, Eric, that I think is interesting for our listeners is diversity drives diversity. I would venture to say because you do have more female partners, more women on the executive team, that women look up and they see a reflection of themselves. So they know that they can have a longer term career here where those types of career potential positions could be a reality for them as well. And so it's really important that we see ourselves reflected within the fabric of an organization. Now, this comes with challenges to organizations that haven't quite figured out diversity and haven't gotten women into those roles. So it's kind of one of those chicken and egg problems. But I think once you get to kind of that critical mass, a third or so, the research shows that you start to get that tipping point where you can get more gender inclusion, more equality in those roles. So, Eric, building off of this and knowing that our listeners love to hear tangible things, actionable things that they can do to have more gender balance in their organization, as somebody that's done that themselves, what are some ideas? What are some things you would offer to people that might be in the quote unquote male dominated industries or might not be able to kind of balance out or get to that more gender equality tipping point? What are some tangible things our listeners could do?
Well, I think one of the ultimate goals is not just having a gender neutral approach to hiring and selection and so forth, but especially to have that at the leadership levels. Because if you come to an organization or you interview with an organization and it's 60% male, but the executive team is 95% male, that's going to be an obvious reflection of a problem potentially, or at least a culture that may not suit you. As a woman looking for a career. So I think it's important to make sure you're not only hiring women, and you don't hire for hire's sake. I mean, I think you leave the door open. We didn't seek financial advisors who were women. We sought excellent financial advisors, and women applied. So I think had we not taken those interviews, we never would have reached that tipping point, as you put it. I think it's very much like pushing a boulder up a hill. You've got to get some momentum or it's going to keep falling back. Mm-hmm. So to me, you have to get started. That's number one. If you have an organization and it's behind in this area, it makes sense to make a commitment to get better. That does not necessarily mean some kind of quota or some kind of hiring policy or freeze or anything like that. It just means an era of inclusion and of awareness. So I think that's a start. And then you have to have someone in a leadership role who mirrors at least somewhat the types of candidates you want to be open to attracting.
Yeah, it does start with leadership. I mean, the values that you're prioritizing, the things that you say. What I hear often with organizations that drive this, like you said, that pushing that boulder up the hill day after day, is that they're consistent. Right? We consistently believe this and value this, and that's going to show up in our actions, our behaviors, the way we make decisions on a day-to-day basis, because that's what people see. It's the action, not just the words, but actual action that aligns with those messages. So I truly believe it's a consistency of doing the right things day after day after day, which can feel exhausting when you're not getting the results right away because those take time. But if you keep at it consistently, then you start to build that positive momentum for the future.
Some of it, Julie, can be as simple as in a job post. Instead of saying we seek candidates who or we seek people who, How about we seek talented men and women who?
Right.
That's subtle, but it's important.
Yeah.
And while it's saying the exact same thing, it's saying it in a way that says, oh, okay.
Right.
And it's just something as simple as that might attract a different candidate. You might be able to have profile just by saying the men and women of.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it helps to have women in your company org chart and on your website and everything else. But even if you don't have that, just putting something subtle like that in a job description, not saying we're looking for women, but saying we're looking for talented men and women who.
That is, I like that. That's a great tangible takeaway for our listeners today. And there's so much research that shows job descriptions have in the past been written more for men. And so when women read them, they don't see themselves in those roles. And it could just be in the tech industry. It's kind of infamous for this,
Sure.
Calling people like tech geeks and like things like this, like just words that don't resonate with women as much. So just simply putting man and woman right in a job description, you can help make that mental math, make that click a little bit to see yourself in that role. Well, one topic that we are super passionate about here at Pivot Point is men as allies. And, Eric, being an ally, as I suspect you have been since the mid-90s and now to women on your team. And I'm curious, what do you think it means to be an ally? If I were to, kind of think about what does male ally mean to you, what do you think is important about being an ally for women?
I think it's important to practice what you preach and be a role model and not just to talk a good game. So I think the proof is in the pudding. You have to see that someone's actually doing this. I also think that you have to have a very open door policy to talk to folks, whether they're employees suggesting other employees or whether they're business leaders or even job candidates. And having that open mind to be prepared for those kind of conversations and those opportunities. They're there. It's a matter of not having someone self-select away from you because you're repelling them in some way,
right.
By the culture that you put forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we call those candid conversations, right? And sometimes they're tricky, right? They're not always pleasant, but if you have an open culture where we discuss the difficult things, and if we have a challenge, we talk about it, we don't sweep it under the rug, people again start to see themselves in that organization and start to believe that this is a place that cares. This is a place where we're going to grow. We're going to challenge because we want to be better. And those are the types of environments that tend to bring more diversity, be more welcoming and supportive and inclusive of diversity. Well,
I don't think there's any question that's true. And I don't know what Sheryl's going to say that's different, but I'm anxious to hear it.
It'll be great dual perspectives. I can't wait to hear what our listeners have to say about this. So, in wrapping up today, Eric, how can our listeners connect with you, follow you, see the great things you're doing out there for gender equality?
Well, first and foremost, we're all over the web and social media. Our homepage is brotmanfinancial.com. That's BROTMAN financial, all one word, .com. We've also put out an ebook that folks can look at that introduces them to us a little bit, and that's at lowtaxbook.com. So between those two sites, you can find what you need. We have active Twitter profiles, LinkedIn profiles, and Facebook profiles, and so we actively communicate with tens of thousands of folks regularly. It's great.
That is great. Well, we'll be sure to link to both of those websites in our show notes. We appreciate you being on today. Thanks for being an ally.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun, and I'm excited to hear the final product and to getting together with Sheryl afterwards.
Well, today we have Sheryl Brown with us, and Sheryl specializes in using her bionic strength in amplified listening strategies in social and digital marketing. Sheryl has made it her mission to change how the financial services community is represented in doing business online. As CEO of Bionic Social LLC, a boutique social and digital marketing agency headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, Sheryl is focused on making the financial services community hip, fresh, and relevant to today's consumers. She speaks compliance too. An international speaker, writer, and trainer, Sheryl has spoken at more than 100 industry events. Wow. And moderated panels with executives from Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and more. You can find her most anywhere online as Bionic Socialite, where she fluxes her message on being bigger, better, and more bionic to financial professionals across the United States. Welcome, Sheryl.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, we always kick off our season 2 with a candid conversation. And I know you're very passionate about gender equality, and as you shared with me, gender neutralization, which we're going to talk about more. I'd love to hear from you. What's a candid conversation you've had on this topic?
Yeah, so about a year and a half ago, I've been speaking. So I have a unique perspective to stand on stage and be able to look out at the sea of audience of people. And January of 2017, I had spoken at a conference in San Antonio. And that day in particular, I don't know why, but I had asked the conference coordinator, how many seats were out there? And 300, we had 300 bodies. And I thought, okay, that's a decent sized audience. I'm used to speaking anywhere from small events all the way and up to including 3 to a little over more 3,000 people in a group. So this was a very comfortable space for me. But I remember stepping out on that stage and looking out, and I only counted 4 women. I had visually seen them, and I honestly remember it was kind of like one was in 25% of the room, one was in 25%. Like they had definitely had not been sitting at one table. And so as I left that stage that day, I felt that there was a due diligence on my part as somebody who has a fairly active social presence, leveraging my platform in that space to simply gender neutralize financial services. And what I meant by that was, why are we not ever understanding or talking about or having enough female representation within financial services and financial technology? Because we cannot have one without the other today. And so it just came to be that I became sort of a face, a voice, very vocal about how we can recruit, train, advance, and retain more women in financial services. What would that look like? So that's been really a huge focus for me going into 2018. And although I'm well known for the social and digital marketing part of it, I've really become this accidental activist in this female in finance space.
Awesome. And with that in mind, you've created and launched a whole community focused on females in finance. Tell us more about that.
I have. So I had been approached to write a book about social and digital marketing. And I have to tell you, when you go, and you're an author, going into a book is no small feat. It takes time away from your personal life, your professional life. Even you have to take less clients to be focused on it. And at the time I thought, I just don't want to spend time writing a book on platforms that are just ever changing. I mean, I literally I was actually teaching a webinar one time on LinkedIn, and the LinkedIn profile changed, like completely changed right in the middle of my webinar. And I had to tell the people on the phone, like, sorry, we're going to have to reschedule because I'm going to have to learn this. And so for me to take time to write a book about social and digital marketing just seemed like an inefficient use of my voice and space and my personal time away from my family. So that day that I went to San Antonio and it was at that conference, I did come off of that and said, okay, I need to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be about women in insurance and financial services and such. But yet, what happened from that, I tell people very transparently, and I think even I said it to you one point, I only wanted to write a book. So the community that has thus been developed, we're 9 weeks in. We are 1,315 members strong as of this morning, because I was looking at it. 9 weeks. It's crazy, but it's been wonderful. So I'm glad people felt compelled by what I was sharing and decided to step up and join and do something.
Mm-hmm. And what are your goals for that group?
Yeah, so the long-term goals, originally, like I said, they've definitely been evolving, right? So the feedback is I went right to the women and said, when you become an accidental activist in anything that you do, you have a due diligence as that leader or as that face or as that contact, point of what can I do to benefit you? What would be best to benefit you? And when I went back to the group and we're asking the women, how can we best build this to support you? The things that came out of it were they wanted a conference that was much more about marketing and personal development, about joining male allies and understanding diversity and inclusion in a much deeper level. So that was something that came of this. Another thing was they wanted a podcast, much like you're doing. They wanted more programming around that CE development and accessibility. So there's just a lot that now what's happened is the book has become a movement, which has become this community. And with that, we are developing an entire program around that. And so I think we're going to see a lot of evolution with the females in finance group. So more to come. And it's every day changing, exciting. And I'm learning too as I go through this.
Awesome. I love the term accident advocate.
I have to tell you, the accidental activist is, I wish was my term. It's not. It's Francesca Ramsey. If you ever have, you can follow her on, she wrote a book called Well, That Escalated Quickly, and it's the memoirs of an accidental activist. And much like her, she went into something completely in a different way and then became this activist on diversity and inclusion. And it's the same for me. So I would love to make sure that she gets kudos for that term, because I'd love to say I came up with it, but I didn't.
Yeah, well, you're putting that on. So curious, a lot of times I hear from people that our industry is really male dominated. And I think that would be easy to say in the finance industry, right? Oh, you don't understand. Just as you looked out on that audience and saw only 4 women. I'm curious, how do you see the finance industry? What gender differences do you see? How does that show up on a daily basis?
Yeah, so it is been predominantly and has been always male dominated. And I think that the women before us who set that stake in the ground and said, I'm going to stay here. I'm one of those long-term people. I think sometimes people think because of what I do with social and digital marketing, and I'm fairly relevant and pretty fresh, I'm almost 50. I've been around the block in financial services since I was 20 years old. So this is almost a 30-year career space for me. And in that time, yes, I have seen women coming through, and I've seen really strong male allies step up and say, I want to help recruit more women. And those are the ones that we want to embrace. One of the things I'm really sensitive to with the females in finance community and with my stake in that is that my project and the community I've built is in no way competitive with men. In fact, an accolade's an accolade. If you earned it, it's yours. All I would like to do is gender neutralize financial services so that we don't automatically think man when they think of that as a career option, because women fit very well. It marries very well with who we are. Overgeneralizing, I realize when I say that, but it marries very well with who we are as caregivers and holistically looking at taking care of clients and people. So I think the guys are great. I think you do a great job. I really want you to help women get more into financial services, and I'm totally there to give you your attaboys, but I'm there to start lifting the women up and giving them their attagirls as well.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I think what you're speaking to is just that neutralization, that we don't assume a financial advisor or a financial professional is a man, kind of conjure up this own unconscious bias of who we expect when we think of that profession. So that neutralization of, hey, women do this as well. I like thinking about us primarily being, the primary caregiver, but most of the time that is the case. And we're also in a role to make a lot of financial decisions. We make 80% of the consumer buying decisions in this country. And so making sure that we have a neutral gender lens on that when we're looking at finances and how we manage them and who our consumer base is really important. So Sheryl, before we wrap up for the day, I'd love for you to share something with our listeners, something that you would encourage them to do, for them to be maybe an accidental activist rather as well. What would be one thing you'd want our listeners to take away from our conversation?
I would like, you touched on the unconscious bias, and I think a lot of people really don't know what that is. And that is where people tend to do business with people that look like them. And it's very unconscious. It's not like they're consciously trying to seek out those individuals. And I had to be very careful of that, even going into the females in finance arena, because I didn't want to just only be seeking white women that I went and connected with. And because it's just not indicative of not only who I am, but the people that are my first line of individuals I go to, I would say that the number one thing that I would like all people in financial services and financial technology to do, many of us go to conferences today. Many of us do. I have a unique perspective as a speaker that I get to stand up and see people, but it's really the cheeks and the seats. It's the individuals who are there that I want you to look around. And if every single person in that row, at that table, at that conference looks like you, it's not a balanced conference. And you're probably not getting the very best material growth, opportunity, learning, development, however you want to define that as a success of a conference. And so what you really need to be doing is working with your event coordinators to make certain that they are reaching into different communities and truly offering a diverse and inclusive opportunity for people to be at that conference and attend with you. If you don't feel comfortable in that space, find someone who is a safe person for you to have those kind of conversations, because as extroverted as I might be in having that conversation comfortably with somebody, you and I both know, Julie, from what you write about and talk about, that is not a comfortable space for a lot of people. So we need to find it. We need to get over ourselves. But I think that just the conference level alone, if I could get individuals to really step up and say, hey, I'm going to raise my hand, I think we can do a better job next year on making this room look richer and fuller and more vibrant. I think that will be an enormous ripple that we could start to put across financial services and financial technology as a whole.
Yeah, I love the idea of making sure that different people are in the room, that your audience is diverse, your panels are diverse, your speakers are diverse, having that as a filter, because we have an automatic associate with people that resemble ourselves. I was at an event last week in athletics, in fact, and there were 2 all white men panels. I call them manels.
Man, okay, I love it. I might steal that from you, just so you know.
I know it's something I'm deeply passionate about, is diversifying our panels, making sure they're diverse perspectives. There are 40% women in the room that I'm sure wanted a female that they could also connect with and see themselves in. So just making sure that your audience is reflective of who you want to do business with, your consumer base, and then making sure your panelists, your speakers are also reflective of that and have a diverse perspective. So great, Sheryl. Before we conclude, I'd love for our listeners to know how best to connect with you. So if you want to diversify your speakers or your participants, I know Females in Finance on Facebook is a great group to share information. How else can they connect?
I always tell everyone the best way to find me online, when your last name's Brown, you just kind of mix in with everybody. So I was a big lover of the Bionic Woman as a kid. And people always ask me why. And real quick, I have to say, it's because she was a real person. Wonder Woman came from someplace else. So Lindsay Wagner was real. They just remade her and made her bionic. So I always tell people that's why I chose her. But you can find me at Bionic Socialite is the best way, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Pinterest, Snapchat, wherever. Just look for Bionic Socialite and you'll find me.
Terrific. Well, thanks for your time today. This has been a great, candid conversation.
Thank you for listening to the Pivot Point podcast and our candid conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with a friend or subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us at Next Pivot Point on social media and check out our website for free, amazing resources to support your candid conversation journey. It's www.nextpivotpoint.com. Thank you.